Welcome to a joint forum of the Journalism School and the Norman Lear Center. I'm Geneva Overholser, Director of the USC Annenberg School of Journalism. Great to have all of you with us. We have a special treat in store today, and I am going to introduce my co-conspirator in this collaboration, my good friend and colleague, Marty Kaplan, who is the Norman Lear Chair here at USC Annenberg, and the director of the wonderful Norman Lear Center, which is part of the Annenberg family. Marty?
Thank you. Thanks, and thanks to all of you for coming. We're going to have a great day. I'm thrilled, Geneva, that we, together with the Journalism School, are doing this and find a way to find common ground on the relationship with audiences, which I think is a theme that connects journalism and communication for today. For those of you who are tweeting, our hashtag is Rogers Award or ASCJ. I know at least a couple people are live tweeting, so welcome to that. The Lear Center, if you don't know it, you can learn all about it at learcenter.org. I invite you to find out about it or look at our materials, which are on the desk outside. Today, we have the great pleasure of awarding the annual Everett Rogers Award. Ev Rogers was an associate dean of this school. He also had the Annenberg Chair while he was here. And when he died suddenly 7 years ago, the school wanted to do something in his honor, and so the Rogers Award was born. He did amazing things in his career. Just one of them was to write a book called A Diffusion of Innovations, which many of you may have read in class. It is the #2 most cited book in all of social science. It became that in the mid-2000s, which is a great thing to happen. He was a leader of the entertainment education movement. We'll hear more about that movement and what EE is today. The award is administered by Hollywood Health and Society, a program of the Lear Center. And I'd like to recognize all at once both the Lear Center Hollywood Health and Society director and staff, also Peter Clark, who is the chair of the jury, and also our distinguished guests, including Sonny Fox, who is on the board of Hollywood Health and Society, and Demetrius Parker from the Centers for Disease Control, which funds the Sentinel for Health Awards, which we'll also be giving out tonight. The way this will go is that Professor Domeyer will be introducing our guest of honor. She will speak. Then we'll have time for questions. We know that at 1 o'clock some people have to slip out for class, but for those of you who can stay, if we're still on a roll, then we'll keep going for a bit with Q&A. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you the Mary Pickford Professor at the School of Cinematic Arts and on the faculty at Annenberg, Domeyer.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to introduce my friend and my professional colleague of many years, Esta de Fossard, which I think she has a wonderful name. Her name is sort of perfect for this, isn't it? It has panache, and it's really a perfect name. We won't forget it. She's been working in this field of entertainment education for over 30 years in about 40 countries. She's also been a consultant to Discovery, NPR, and the Barney programs. She's the author of 50 books, including writing and producing for TV and film, which is probably the most substantive and used textbook about entertainment education and developing material for film and television. But she's also written a lot of children's books. I love this, and I haven't read Monty the Runaway Mouse, but I plan to do that shortly. She currently teaches at Johns Hopkins University. She teaches entertainment education and intercultural education. This award today that we're giving her is for exceptional creativity and excellence in research. And I don't think there's a better candidate than this very unique woman who's going to speak to us today, Esta de Fossard, who really has brought great creativity herself to this field, tremendous energy and enthusiasm about doing this kind of work, and a real academic rigor about understanding it and transmitting it to others. And I asked her last night what is her favorite accomplishment, and she said it was teaching a new generation of students to think about these things. And it's just a great pleasure to have her with us. We're very honored and delighted, and Esta, please come up and talk to us.
You might want to take your notes in case you have the same thing about somebody else. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Let's try it again. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Ah, that's much better. Thank you very much. Now I feel as though I really belong here. Needless to say, I'm very happy to be with you, and I'm so glad that at least a few males have joined us. At first I thought we were going to have only female communicators and journalists, but welcome, gentlemen. I'm glad you have joined us. I am happy to be here with you today and to share some thoughts and ideas and questions on this wonderful world of entertainment education. And also to remember the remarkable man who, in fact, brought us all together here, Everett Rogers. And you mentioned the very thing I was going to mention. One of the things that really impressed me about Everett and that has made a difference to my work was his diffusion of innovation, his behavior change, diffusion of innovation theory, which tells us, it sounds easy, but a lot of people don't think about it, that not everybody learns at the same speed or learns in the same manner. And when we're talking about behavior change and trying to encourage people sometimes to make quite dramatic changes in their lives, we have to remember they're not all going to take it in at the same speed, understand it at the same speed, or do anything about it. I'm going to be talking about entertainment education serial drama. And before I go any further, I want to clear up one misunderstanding. We are not, my friends, not talking about soap opera. And if anybody in the entertainment education world uses the word soap opera, look out. The term soap opera came all the way back in history when radio had just started. And most radio stations put on the air these very dramatic little drama, well, serials, let's say, to entertain housewives as they were doing the boring work of the daily chores. Most of them were sponsored by soap companies, usually dishwashing soap and floor scrubbing soap. So that's where the word soap comes from. The word opera comes from the fact that these dramas were enormously exaggerated, just like an opera. Entertainment education is not soap opera. It's using a very powerful serial drama to attract and hold the attention of the audience, and then working into that drama very important education messages. Let me just remind you before we go any further that the word entertain or entertainment comes from the Latin word entretenere, which means to hold the attention of. So the drama, the serial drama, is to hold our audience's attention. And the other word, education, comes from, again, the Latin educare, which means to lead out of. But it's also interesting to note that it also means to give birth to a child. So what we're doing in entertainment education is, first of all, holding the attention of our audience and then encouraging and inspiring a change in the audience that will lead them to be almost a new person. Let me point out before I go any further that it's obvious that I'm at least 124 years old and that I have been, don't you contradict me, and that I have been engaged in the world of entertainment and education most of my life. I grew up in Australia, which explains my rather strange accent. All right. At the age of 7, I started acting in radio as a radio actor. At the age of 15, I started writing educational radio programs for the Australian Broadcasting Commission. So entertainment and education have been with me for a long time. Eventually, I moved into the field of television, I suppose you'd call it, television education as well. I wrote many books, and amongst the many books, of course, she says, showing off, are these books on entertainment education. And if you don't know anything about them, you can come and have a look later. Most of the work I do now, or have been doing for the last several hundred years, is in developing countries. In countries where very often, indeed almost always, the only education that our audience receives in order to encourage them to lead better lives are the serial dramas that we put on the radio or television for them. It's therefore very, very important that we know our audience. It's one thing to know your topic. It's one thing to be an expert in your topic. But if you cannot honestly know your audience, you might as well close down right now. Putting on entertainment education is not about you as a brilliant creator. It's about you as a person who sincerely cares for your audience and creates something that will make them pay attention and improve their lives. All right. Very often, the only access, as I say, that they have is our programs. Several years ago, I was leading a workshop in Ghana where they were preparing a new entertainment education drama with the glorious title, Hee Ha Ho. So every day it would come on with this, Hee Ha Ho, and everybody would tune in. The main aim of the project was to teach parents in very remote, poor areas of the country how to take care of their children, how to have fewer children, and how to protect themselves and their children from diseases. At the beginning of the workshop, as I usually do, I reminded everybody of the importance of walking in the shoes of our audience. Well, the very next morning, just as I was about to introduce everybody for the morning, a young man strode in, beautifully dressed in an immaculate suit. He walked right down to the very front, turned around, held up in the air a pair of the most dilapidated, shredded, horrible sandals. And he said to all of us, "Whose shoes are these?" Talk about dramatic impact. He really brought us all to the point of realizing the people whose lives we are hoping to improve are people who have virtually nothing, let alone education and access to the type of material which we wanted to help them understand. This all happened in a design workshop. Now, I'm a very, very great believer in the design workshop as the beginning of working out an entertainment education drama serial. In the design workshop, we put together the design document. And in that document, we have the precise wording of the knowledge that must be put into every episode of the drama. At the design workshop, we have the experts, of course. We also must have the writers and the producers and members of our audience, not just representatives of our audience, but real members of our audience. Sometimes they're very shy when they first come into the meeting, and we have to encourage them and help them realize that we really want to hear from them. It's vitally important that we have the writers and the producer or producers with us, because what they must understand from the very beginning, it is not their job to say when this piece of knowledge will be given, how this piece of knowledge will be given. The education side is the responsibility of the educators, the people who know two things: what the audience currently knows and understands, what the audience should know and understand, and then a third, vitally important point: how to give that knowledge to the audience so that they can understand it and will want to use it. And typically one of the most rewarding things of a design workshop is watching the writers turn around and become totally engaged in, yes, of course, that's the way we must do it. I had a little exercise yesterday, which over at Sandra's office, with some young people who were interested in writing stories and knowing about writing. It's a little exercise I often do, which is to get people to write a very short story, just 4 folded pages, about anything. And then say to them, now put into your story a message about, if you like, clean water. And never once in all my 150 years of teaching has anyone said, that's impossible. It is possible to put virtually any message into any story. Once the writers realize that, they realize, I'm not writing a story about diarrhea. Boy, how that would run on.
There's the drum when you need it.
Sorry. They can write a story that is totally appealing to that audience and then work that message into the audience. Into the drama. That's why we must have at the drama members of our audience. Also, I insist that our writers go out into the field anonymously and live for about a week in the area where our audience lives. They have no right to tell anybody who they are, but they observe and they listen and they think. And many of the writers come home with photographs of people that they've met out in the villages and the areas. They pin them on the wall, and they use these people as the main characters in their story. So we're talking about the extraordinarily important business of getting to know your audience. All right. There are 2 sides to this, as you know, the education and the entertainment. At the design workshop, we're working very, very specifically on the education. So I'm going to ask you to look with me a little more carefully at the education side. Now, for those of you who are in the journalism world, I think this is just as vitally important that you know and understand the audience for whom you are preparing your journalistic articles and your news items and everything else. If your audience doesn't understand the grounding from which you are coming, first of all, they're not going to read you very much longer, and secondly, you're not going to have very much influence on them at all. So I'd like to, using some examples from experiences that I've had in the developing world, invite us to look at some of the really important aspects and parts of the entertainment education experience. Starting always with walking in the shoes of your audience. I'm going to repeat. I don't care how brilliant you are, how many PhDs you have, how many Everett Rogers Awards you have. The most important thing is to put yourself aside and walk in those shoes and get to know your audience, so that the very first thing you can do is present to your audience a message that is completely correct from their perspective. Let me tell you about a rather classic example of what happened with regard to the message being correct. This was in an Asian country, and they were doing a program on encouraging parents to have smaller families. And one of the things they were doing was encouraging women to use contraceptives, because very often the men believed that it was totally unmasculine for them to in any way interrupt the flow of their, shall we say, life or sperm or whatever. It's very, very difficult to inspire men to use contraceptives. So we concentrated on women. And in this one particular set of programs, the emphasis was on using the oral pill, or as they called it in the programs, the contraceptive pill. Well, one day, a woman came into the little health clinic in the village. She was very angry. She was very upset because she was pregnant. And she said, I have been using the pill every night the way you told me to. But she had not been swallowing the pill. Right. She assumed that because this was to prevent her being pregnant, there was only one place to put the pill. And that was at the other end of her body. Yes, it's a funny story, but it's also a tragic story because the people creating the programs did not put themselves in those shoes, listen to the language of the audience, listen to the understanding of the audience, and realize that saying using a contraceptive pill could be very, very easily misunderstood. So what's vitally important is to make it correct for your audience. Get down there into those shoes and understand everything from their viewpoint. Another problem which faces us quite a lot is giving people complete information. Now we're talking about a serial drama, which means that we will be doing 13, 26 episodes. That means either 3 months or 6 months, once a week. We're dividing the knowledge among these various episodes. So how can we give complete knowledge within one episode about a fairly complicated subject? Well, obviously the people who create the dramas like to think, well, of course everyone's going to listen to every episode. This is a fantastic drama. We've got wonderful actors. We've got a wonderful message. Everyone will listen. Sure. But things happen in every life which interrupt what we plan to do, and we can't do it. So how can we make sure that someone who misses some of our vitally important episodes can find out what to do? We have a man, for example, whose wife suddenly comes down with something. He doesn't know what. She's having terrible diarrhea. She's bright red in the face. He's heard a little bit about diarrhea diseases in our serial, but he hasn't heard everything. All right. What we need with every single episode of our program, of our drama serial or serial drama, is an epilogue. At the end of the program, perhaps one of the characters, one of the believable characters, not one of the comic characters, but one of the believable characters comes on and says, if you need immediate help or you immediately need some more information, please go to this place or this person. Repeat, go to this place or this person. And that is given at the end of every program. Sometimes it's possible to use an actual doctor. Going on in Alabama at the moment, which has been going on now for several years, there's a wonderful entertainment education serial drama called Body Love. Marvelous young lady, Connie Kohler, was the one who started this several years ago, and I went down and worked with them for a while we got it going. And this is to help African American people avoid and or deal with diabetes. So for the epilogue of that program, at the end of every program, an actual local diabetes doctor, African American, comes on, speaks directly to the audience, and reminds them, yes, if they have a computer and they can get on the web, there are places they can look on the web, or they can call him or come to his office. So in order to make the message complete in every episode, we must make sure our audience knows where they can go to get more immediate help or information. All right. Another challenge, particularly I think in the modern world, is keeping our information, our knowledge, our program sufficiently concise. Now, if you're an expert in the field and you know enough to write 6 or 7 textbooks, and I ask you to please put all that into one 15-minute program while there's also a drama going on, you're going to tell me I'm a complete idiot. But this is where experts need to stop and ask themselves, what is really essential? The secret is the KISS rule. K-I-S-S. Keep it short and simple. Or as some people prefer to say, you can join me if you like, keep it simple, stupid. Right, all right. Very simple little example. You're standing on the side of a frantically busy highway. Traffic going in all directions at the most incredible speed. And suddenly a young child comes skipping down and is aiming straight towards that freeway. Are you going to say, excuse me, my child, do you realize how fast those vehicles are going and how much they weigh and what would happen if one of them hit you? No. You simply say, stop. Yes, thank you, you're all brilliant. Stop. Stop. Only one word is necessary. So when we're trying to reach out to people, through education, through entertainment education, through journalism, keep it short and simple. Yes, you can make available to your audience places where they can go for much, much more reading, knowledge, activity, whatever, on the topic. But when you're trying to make people change their behavior, particularly if you're out in the developing world where people are not particularly educated, they don't have access to the internet, they don't have access to all the greatest libraries in the world, it's up to you to walk in their shoes and put the information concisely, but also convincingly. Very, very important. All right. There are a few other vitally important things we have to remember. One of them is to make the message consistent. Many years ago, the glorious Coca-Cola company insisted things go better with Coca-Cola, or things go better with Coke. Well, my car ran out of gas one day, and I thought, all right, if things go better with Coke, blah, 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 blah. No, it didn't. Do things really go better with Coca-Cola, or is this just a sales gimmick? Now, what we have to do with our audience is tell them exactly the consistent truth. Sometimes it helps to break down your main message into a simple little, almost like a little sort of rhythm or a rhyme. For example, in one of our programs, again, we're talking about diarrhea and how to protect yourself from diarrhea, and more particularly, how to help yourself recover from diarrhea. We had 4 things: water, food, rest, help. We constantly say to people, water, food, rest, help. Then we would expand. Water. Drink plenty of clean water, at least 6 cups a day. Food. Eat small amounts of non-fatty foods several times a day. And then we had to be sure that we knew what foods were available to that audience and recommend those foods to them. Rest. Rest for at least an hour a day, plus sleeping comfortably at night. Help. Go to the nearest, and then we would tell them again where that at the end of the episode, where the nearest place was where they could get help. And sometimes it was rather fun to put your little main messages into a song. Water, food, rest and help. Water, food, rest and help. If you have diarrhea, water, food, rest and help. Now you can all sing it, you see, right? But that will stay in people's minds. And suddenly, when somebody has diarrhea, they'll find themselves saying, water, food, rest and help. Oh, I know what to do. Keep it simple. Keep it clear. In today's glorious world where we are torturing, slaughtering, totally avoiding sensible language, sorry, but that's my opinion, we have to be very, very careful. We put everything abbreviated. I don't think anybody uses the word telephone anymore. If you're lucky, it's a phone or an iPod. And then we have all these apps. What the heck is an app? An appendage? An aperture? An appendix? Whoa. Okay, that's fine in our community. But if you're talking to people from a different audience, please make sure they know what these abbreviations are. The worst one in the world is HIV and AIDS. The initials, HIV, and the acronym, AIDS. Now, I'm not going to embarrass you by asking you all to stand up and tell me exactly what the initials mean and exactly what the acronym means. You probably could. But where this becomes a serious problem is in our developing countries where HIV and AIDS mean nothing at all. And one of the biggest problems with HIV and AIDS is that it is not visible. So you're saying to people out there in all these crazy words that you use, well, be careful that you don't acquire the human immunodeficiency virus, or you might get the acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Oh yeah? Then show me what on earth you are talking about. We can't, we don't. It's rather frightening to know that one of the highest rates of these two glorious words, or initials and acronyms, HIV and AIDS, is in Washington, D.C., in this country. In those parts of Washington, D.C., where the children are the least educated. Now, I teach entertainment education. I also teach intercultural communication. And one of the exercises I give my students is, could you please explain to someone who doesn't know these words what you mean by HIV and AIDS? They all say, I think I'm going to sign out of this class. Of course, I go to the door and don't let them, but still. Be very, very careful. I had a young assistant once who worked with me, and she was constantly using initials and acronyms. And I asked her, why do you do that? And she said, because it shows how intelligent I am. I said, no, darling, sorry, but it shows how thoughtless you are. Get yourself in the shoes of your audience. And please don't use initials and acronyms with me, because I'm too stupid to understand them, too. She did get the message. Another vitally important part of successful entertainment education is walking in the shoes of our audience and making everything culturally appropriate. Don't ask your audience to do things or make behavior changes that are totally inappropriate. For me, one of the most powerful lessons in cultural appropriateness came when we were in Swaziland, where my wonderful husband, who's sitting here next to the lovely lady in a yellow sweater, he was the ambassador in Swaziland, so we lived in Swaziland for some time. And we were putting on the air a program to try to encourage people to bring their children to be vaccinated against the usual childhood diseases. It was a fascinating program. We had a wonderful song. Everything was great. But they didn't come. Well, one day I was out in the back blocks of Swaziland, and I met a tribal doctor. And I asked him, can you tell me why? And he looked at me as though I was completely stupid and ignorant. You don't need to comment on that. And he said, look, he said, I'll come and talk to your audience. And I think it'll make a difference. So he came at the end of our program, and in Swahili he said to his audience, I'm so-and-so, your tribal doctor, and yes, I have the boo-boos, which was his word for medicines, to cure local diseases. But he said then all these white people came charging into our country, bringing all their ridiculous, horrible diseases with them, and my boo-boos can't deal with those. What you're going to have to do is go to their doctors and get their boo-boos. Immediate change. Because he was their cultural doctor. He was their cultural leader. They trusted him, they believed him, and they came to our centers to have their children vaccinated. I will never forget that wonderful man teaching me such a very simple lesson. Another culturally appropriate thing we have to bear in mind is that in many parts of the world, it is the man, maybe in some of your lives as well, it's the man who makes all the decisions about which television program we're going to watch, which radio program we're going to listen to. Now, if we want to put on the air a program about pregnancy for women or looking after women during childbirth, you can be very sure that in many of these developing countries, nobody will listen because the men are not going to listen to a program about looking after the pregnant woman. So what do we do in that case? Well, we had a wonderful example in Indonesia where our aim was to encourage men to treat pregnant women correctly, to look after them correctly, and make sure that everything was right in their lives. But we started with a mystery story. The program opened with two men talking to each other, and then the next shot was one of these two men lying dead in a riverbed. What happened? This was a murder, a suicide, an accident. It was a mystery story and immediately grabbed the attention of our male listeners. We had a very dominant, strident, handsome policeman. And he called all sorts of people into the police station to question them. And among them was a young woman who was pregnant. And the police were dragging her into the police station. And this policeman let it fly. Told them that they were not only doing the wrong thing, but they were stupid, unmasculine idiots. Didn't they know that the most important way to show that you are a real man is to know how to look after a new life inside a wonderful woman? Well, the mystery went on for some time, and this particular woman was quite involved. Actually, she wasn't guilty, but she was quite involved. So we had the opportunity. And then the policemen would go out, of course, into the villages and see people mishandling women and their wives, and they would stand up and make themselves look like the police chief and hand over exactly the same message. And it worked extremely well. So we put together all these important points, and we can. As long as we're walking in the shoes of our audience, we can make a difference in the lives of many, many people. But it does rely on getting to know our audience. And some of you may recall that the importance of walking in the shoes of our audience is beautifully summarized in the words of Oscar Hammerstein. It's a very ancient saying, and a true and noble thought, that when you become a teacher, by your pupils you will be taught. I've now become a teacher, and forgive me if I boast. I've now become an expert at the subject I love most. Getting to know you, getting to know all about you. Haven't you noticed? Suddenly I'm free and easy because of all the wonderful and new things I'm learning about you day by day. Thank you.
We're going to have a few minutes of questions, but before we do, I just wanted to let Esta know that in addition to receiving this evening at the Writers Guild the trophy for the Sentinel, for the Rogers Award at the Sentinel for Health event, there is also another part of the Rogers Award, and it's flat and comes in an envelope, and I'm happy to present it to you.
Thank you very much. Very, very kind. You might also be happy to know that what's contained in that envelope will be passed on to some of the organizations with which I work, one of them being Compassion, an organization which allows you to adopt a child in a foreign country, keep the child with her parents, but support the child. And we have supported many children over the years. And if we ever have the opportunity to go to that country, they go out of their way to let you meet that person. And there are two. There's Compassion, and the other one we always support is the Smile Train, where children who are born with a cleft lip and have their faces hideously deformed, for $25, they can turn that person into a beautiful face. So, thank you very much. Now then, let's have a few questions or disagreements or whatever. Yes, sir.
You've done a lot of work in entertainment education as it relates to malaria. In your view, is there a need for more production in that area, more EE programs? Because we see a lot of on HIV, AIDS, and other things, but very little lately on malaria.
Right.
What will it take to get that production
Yeah.
boosted?
I'm very, very glad you asked that question. Are we putting aside things like malaria because of all this that's being done about HIV? One of the problems that arose there, my friend, was that all the people who provide money and support for these things all turned around and said we have to stop the spread of AIDS, and sort of stopped giving in other directions. But now I think they're coming back to realize, first of all, we have to change the messages about AIDS, but that also at the same time, we can't just walk away and let people die of malaria. So yes, we are coming back to that. But I'd love to tell you a very brief little story about that, where mosquito nets, as you know, they were encouraging people to put nets over their beds to protect themselves and their children. Well, in one particular country, all of a sudden there were millions of weddings going on. All these glorious brides dressed in all these beautiful white costumes. Oh, no. Yeah, all of which were made out of mosquito nets. But we soon put a stop to that. So I think your role in this is, as much as possible, to encourage that we continue in these other areas so that they don't slip back to where they were previously. Yes, ma'am.
Let's talk about entertainment education in the U.S.
Yes.
Certainly in a developing country, we have
Yes.
more of an opportunity to present a message multiple times and to work from the bottom up.
Right.
Chat a bit how you think that those of us that care about causes greatly can go forward and help in that capacity.
Right. Unfortunately, in this country, we're so accustomed to watching fictional things that are either hilariously funny, frightfully rude, with naked people wandering all over the place, or full of crime. Now, I think a lot has to do with our schools, that we need to go back and encourage people in America to think and to be a little bit more creative. We have now the advantage, or is it a disadvantage, of the web and all these little cell phones and things that people carry around. And people are saying a lot, okay, we can do entertainment education dramas on the web, and people may look at them whenever they choose. No. The big advantage to everybody watching or listening to an episode at exactly the same time, the same episode at the same time, means that they're much more likely and much more inclined to talk about, did you see what happened in that thing today? Whereas if everybody's watching a different episode at a different time, that doesn't happen. And it's that interaction between things that really does happen. I would also like to say, Paula, that I think it's very important, you people in the journalism world too, that we start encouraging young people to listen, to look at, and to read things that require their imagination. Because I was going recently to buy a book for a young girl we know who's been adopted from Ethiopia, and I wanted to get her a book that would help her learn to read English. Find a book with no pictures, or very few pictures. A Spanish friend of mine said to me one day, "Hey, he not reading the words, he reading the pictures." She was trying to teach her 5-year-old grandson to read, and he was reading the pictures. Now, to go back to what you asked, Paula, until we re-encourage young people to pay attention and to think about the programs they're looking at or listening to, we're going to have a lot of trouble. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We can. Like this one, Body Love. If you don't know the Body Love program, look it up, and you can hear episodes on the radio. And this is on the radio in America, not even on television. But it does go right back to training our children at an early age. I was telling some of you yesterday that I've started doing a children's program called And Then, where I tell a story, no pictures, tell a story, and the story itself is about 500 to 600 words long, and we get right down towards the very end, and then I stop and say to the children, and then? They have to finish the story, which means they've had to listen to every word, turn on their imagination, and come up with their idea. And they love it. It's incredibly popular. I don't know whether that answers your question, dear.
Half and half. I just think in society as it is today, I don't know that you get people sitting down at the same time. I think with DVRs, they sit down whenever they have time, and I think we're not going to have that opportunity again. But if you're telling me the end result is generating discussion, well, maybe we need to do things that stimulate discussion and not be as concerned about when they watch the show.
Absolutely. Yes, go.
Just in keeping with that, I heard some wonderful news recently, which is that some of the feature entertainment education programming that was done in Africa, the Naria, and there's a whole bunch of feature films, Yellow Card, that were made in the early 90s and the 80s, have become so popular they're being pirated on the streets of Tanzania. So they're actually being sold along with Michael Douglas movies by pirates who think they're going to make a profit on the entertainment education model, which to me was a wonderful thing. I'm not in favor of pirates, but I'm delighted with the endorsement, exactly, of these ideas in a more commercial frame. I'm wondering if there's any way in the U.S. that we might be able to think about that connection, that it's so popular that it actually becomes wanted by a profit-making arm of it.
Well, then maybe you and I could start a pirate system. Yes, Ginger.
Esther, I've talked with you so many times and been so interested in all your visits to all these different countries. And a lot of times you're talking about the problem with women and how many babies they're always having, and how there's not a lot of attention sometimes on that problem. And so I don't believe I ever asked you. We have a law in this country that keeps us from doing anything in any other country about, for instance, Planned Parenthood. And I'm just wondering, how did you, through these years, handle that problem? That situation?
Thank you, Ginger. I think the rule is that we're not allowed to enforce any of this. And what we are not doing, we're not saying you must have only X number of children. What we're pointing out is that look at the people who have a small family, how much more comfortable their lives are, how much better their children can get on in life. The choice is yours. If you decide that you would like to have a smaller family, here's what you can do about it to ensure it. But we're not enforcing it at all. I think that's...
I thought they couldn't even talk about it.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, not a problem. All right, now I believe you were next.
Thank you. I'm interested in the role of supporting young people's production of entertainment education, in addition to their ability to imaginatively deconstruct what they're seeing to create their own. And is this bottom-up, decentralized telling of stories a more authentic and fiscally viable way to promote entertainment education going forward?
I think part of the answer to that, my dear, is that yes, I do teach entertainment education classes, and every student in every entertainment education class has to come up with their own drama. They have to first of all decide who's the audience with whom they want to work, what are the changes they want to do, how do they write the drama, how do they bring it about. And on the whole, I think, in fact, I have certain people who say, yes, I've used it on the local radio station, and seems to have worked very well. I might just say that there's a student of mine in the room here who went to my entertainment education classes, and she could stand up and tell you whether she thinks what we talked about, how to do it, was a good idea or not. I'd like to introduce you to a wonderful, brilliant woman, Brooke Haycock, Shut up and stand up, right? Yay, Brooke.
I took the class too.
Yes, I know.
I'm actually hugely interested in what you just asked. I started out as a student organizer, working with high school students, raising their voices around changes that they thought needed to happen in their school. Sometimes I think the research, if you look at like Theater of the Oppressed, some of these other, the research suggests that young people who participate in it are changed, but not so much. I don't know how much data there is, maybe someone else in the room knows more about it, how much change through participatory, theater or storytelling there is for the people who are watching. I think there are also challenges. Sometimes, do young people, as they're telling their stories, are they fully aware of what's happening to them at that moment? Is it listening to them, reflecting as an adult, kind of saying what's the impact of what they're experiencing, how they're understanding it. But I think there are challenges, but obviously it's a huge opportunity.
Paula, did you want to add anything to that?
No, she has it exactly.
Thank you, Brooke. Yes.
Esta, first of all, thank you. What a wonderful presentation and discussion. I'm curious about our tendency overseas is to do campaigns of relatively short duration. Can you talk a little bit about sustained and systematic approaches that continue over time and in relation to behavior change?
I think that's a very good one. It is almost inevitable that somebody or a group from this country or some other countries will go into a developing country to conduct a campaign, which goes on for a certain period of time. Thank you very much, goodbye. One of the major programs with which I worked, which was very different from that, was in Nepal, where we started a radio drama called Cut Your Coat According to Your Cloth, which, going back to Ginger's question, was about having a small family so that you could afford to keep this family and that you'd all be happy together. Well, they wouldn't let us stop. Yes, Johns Hopkins was out there for a campaign, but the audience loved the story so much. It was mostly written by a wonderful old man called Gataula, who had been a story writer for years. He was brilliant. But we went on and on and on and on, supported largely by the Nepali government to do this because everybody really loved the drama. So I think that tells you what's going to make a difference between a campaign and an ongoing assistance is the quality of what you produce. That makes sense? Yes, sir.
Yes, in terms of getting to know and understand how your audience thinks and acts, do you find, especially as it depends on the radio, that you think of an audience of one? You're talking to one person, maybe you get a sense of who that one person is, and that's more effective in relaying the narrative that way, rather than trying to think of a whole group.
Oh, yes. Yes. As I told you, I grew up in the radio world. My mother was a radio drama writer for years, and she used to always say to me, tell your story to one person. And what you've raised is a very, very good point. If you think that you and I are sitting down together and I'm saying, or you're saying to me, oh, I know this fantastic story about, and you hold my attention and tell me that story because you know you're talking to me. And I think a good writer always does that. A good writer is never thinking, oh my gosh, I've got an audience out there of 650 million people. No. I have a story to tell, and I want you to listen to it. That's a very, very good point, that a good story is told to one person. What was it Shakespeare used to say with the stuff he did? I'm writing this for what did he call him? The man down the street or someone of no importance. But he wanted this person to know this interesting story. So, yes, I think a good writer always does it that way. Sir, and then
at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, we are working much more deliberately and intentionally to include intercultural communication as we think about our audiences and messaging, whether we're talking to African Americans or Italian Americans or Jewish Americans. And I want to know what recommendations can you share with us about when we gather the team of the health communication folks, subject matter experts on the science side, in Hollywood Health and Society, for example, is part of our team. How do you introduce intercultural communication as part of that development of the messaging?
Right. Well, okay. Which one are you putting first, intercultural communication or the development of the message?
I'm thinking that it all starts together
Yes.
at the same time.
Yes, it does. Let's go back to what the gentleman in the corner asked up there. Sometimes it helps, and again, I go back to what my writers did, to have some photographs. You stick them up on the wall. I'm talking to that man who happens to be a Jewish rabbi, and I'm talking to that woman who's an African American, and I'm talking to that couple who are Spanish American. What am I talking about? Roll it back to the emotion. What am I trying to get their hearts to feel? Not their brains, their hearts. What do I want them to feel? And let's move it to something positive. You might start out by saying, I want them to feel fear, but then we want to move them to feeling hope. Start that way, because one of the extraordinary things about human beings is they may look very different, they may speak totally different languages, they may live in totally different places, but they all have the same emotions. So the doorway, the approach, is through the emotions. If you, my friend, were suffering the most hideous tragedy, something had happened horribly to your most adored young child, I don't care if you're pink and white stripes or yellow spots or whatever. It's my heart and your heart that get together over that tragedy. Start with the emotions. Okay, does that help?
That helps.
Good. Yes, ma'am.
So you've done a lovely job of helping remind those of us who are journalists about the importance of audience. I want to ask you to get even more specific. You were suddenly transformed from education, entertainment educator to journalist, and then commit journalism. How would you put your good points into practice in some specific ways?
I think I'd say exactly what I said to my friend over here. You know, in almost anything we do, the most motivating part of what we're trying to do is the emotion. Now, as I said before, people have the same emotions. Journalism is a very challenging field, and yes, I did try it for a little while once, and then I thought, oh, phooey, I'm supposed to just put the facts here, and that's not good enough for a person with my imagination. But I think you want to also think about what difference do these facts make to my audience, to the life of my audience, or what difference could these facts make? And try to put that back into the emotional structure. Can what I'm saying make people proud? Or can it make people think, wow, I could be more successful, more valuable, more beautiful if I didn't do that? I think it's just going back on that same thing. Why am I putting this into a journalist story for this audience? Just so that I'll get my paycheck? Or just because it's a wonderfully scary, woohoo, look what those people did? Or because this could make a difference in their lives? Think of it that way. And if it doesn't work, scream at me. Yes, sir.
Back to referring to the earlier question about campaigns versus longer term. What are your thoughts on the prospects of getting film industries in developing countries to integrate social change and behavior change messages into feature films, specifically Nigeria, which, as you know, huge film industry. It's now number 2 in terms of number of films produced behind Bollywood. We're talking about Nollywood.
Yes.
And Nollywood is ahead of Hollywood now.
Exactly. Okay. One of the things we picked up on, and perhaps you've seen this in some films, that sometimes you'll see a product. There's a bottle of Coca-Cola there or something. Nobody says anything about the Coca-Cola, but you keep seeing this bottle of Coke all over the place. And people almost inadvertently pick up on the bottle of Coke. Now, what you can say to the current filmmakers is, you know what? I think people would start paying a lot more attention to your films if you just made a little comment now and again about the importance of clean water. You don't have to change the story, but you have this wonderful man, handsome guy, who's the principal actor in this story, what if he just, okay, it's a story about murder, it's a story about whatever you like. Sorry, Mr. Microphone. But what if you just had him every now and again say, hey, don't drink that, it's not clean. Here, have some clean water. That's all. You're not asking them to dramatically change the subject. You can pay them a little bit, if you like, to say something about clean water. They will be surprised if you do some follow-up and find out that, oh my goodness, because Mr. Film Man, you are creating a fabulous film, look at the difference you've made. The number of people who are now drinking clean water. I'm not asking you to do a campaign on clean water, just a very simple little action by one of your major characters. It works. Okay?
We have time for one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm curious, what would you recommend for someone looking to empower and educate young girls in the sciences, like science, technology, engineering, and math?
Okay. If you didn't hear her, what would I suggest about empowering young girls in the sciences and educating more in the sciences? Right. I think one of the most powerful things there is to tell little girls the stories about people like Marie Curie, some of the most extraordinary people who are beautiful women, friendly, wonderful women, but they've done one little thing that can make a huge difference in the lives of other people. I think one of the things we have to remind little girls, and without looking anywhere in the room, I'm also saying sometimes bigger girls, that the most important thing in the world is not walking around half naked attracting the attention of men. The most important thing in the world, little girls, what will you be remembered for? Or to correct my grammar, for what will you be remembered? What do you want people to remember about you? Look around you, my dear. Is there something you see in the world that isn't working as well as it could? Why don't you get together with a few of your little friends, sit down and think, what could we do about that to make that better? Put them in groups together. Don't challenge them to get A+ on an assignment. Find one little thing. Gee, you're an intelligent girl. Your little friends are intelligent. Why don't you sit down and tell me what you think could be done about that? Okay? Yes?
It might be interesting to target teachers and school
Yes.
counselors as well, and kind of get at their belief about girls in the sciences.
I think you should speak with Brooke afterwards. She does these wonderful things in the education world. I'm sure she could help you.
Esta has kindly agreed to stay and keep the conversation going informally, but I just wanted to say that we know what you will be remembered for by us, and thank you so much.
You're not going to tell me? Okay. Thank you. Thank you.